Mother Russia. Twitch chat.
Awesome. Let's go. Well, welcome everybody to episode 4 of the TForce LCS Rundown, a audio problem free show for once. You can find us at lcs.trinityforcepodcast.com. If you are listening to the recording of the show, we are live every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 6 p.m. Pacific for those over on the West Coast. Europe, sorry, don't know. Your best guess. I bet you know if you're in Europe. I don't even have to tell you. You guys are on top of that stuff. And you can join us at stream.trinityforcepodcast.com. The MP3 will be available on iTunes and Stitcher every Tuesday from our lovely producers over at the Trinity Force Podcast Network. And this week, I am, as always, Mont Ganorum, the original bow tie wearer, joined by Optimus Tom.
I'm here. I'm half awake. But if I fall asleep halfway through the podcast, it's probably because I don't have a bow tie on. So
that is true.
Sorry.
Your regular tie is, well... It is what it is, and we accept you for it. And we are joined by our newest show host, Greg CredibleMushroom Russo.
Hello, guys. Good to be here.
Awesome. For those of you who listened to the recording of the podcast, you heard Adam's introduction. Not last week, because unfortunately we did miss an episode. Not last week, but the week before. Wrecker will no longer be joining us on the show, and Greg has taken his position. He has come with a bow tie. I assume it's an homage to me. It's a pretty safe assumption, I think. But Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here?
I am CredibleMushroom. I'm a Silver 1 support main, North America, obviously. I've been podcasting for quite a while, mostly with the EVE Online community. A lot of the listeners that are in the chat now will know me from Declarations of War, which is my EVE podcast. And it looks like they are flooding the chat, which is awesome. And I'm really happy to be here on the TForce LCS Rundown. I can never fill the hole left by Wrecker's penis, but I can certainly try.
Such a small hole, really?
I got a question. Was it like Highlander, where you had to chop it off and then absorb its powers, and there was a whole sequence and everything, and now you absorb Wrecker's penis? Just the head. Okay.
It's now the CredibleMushroom tip. I think that's going to be our end of show segment is the mushroom tip of the week.
Just the tip from CredibleMushroom.
I owe some shout-outs. Since it was my first show, a lot of people were really excited. I need to give a shout-out to Mod Bro from Australia and all of the Australian fans listening to the show. I want to give a shout-out to Darche, who I turned on to the podcast by becoming a co-host, so hopefully he's listening. Go listen to the main Trinity Force podcast as well. And I also want to give a shout-out to my personal League of Legends life coach, Kanan, who has taught me a lot about the game, and I probably wouldn't have gotten out of bronze without him.
There you go. Right. Well, for your Australian fans, do not also forget to listen to the Oz LOL podcast, our Australian brothers across the pond. They release every Thursday, and also do not forget our show, Mother Russia, but not from Russia, the Trinity Force podcast, which airs on Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. So a little bit earlier for you working folk. So while we missed a week, we are picking up where Super Week left off. We had IEM this week, while the rest of the pros had some well-deserved time off from a very exciting Super Week. So we've got a lot to talk about, so let's dive right in. Rumors and transactions for this week. I'm going to kind of blow through this because, quite frankly, we have a lot to get into later on. So Curse brought on Bunny Fufu as their support, while Saint Vicious stepped down again. Team Dignitas brought in Challenger Pro Flappy Bearfish as their substitute on AD carry. Cloud9 drafted MIA, previously MIA. Wow.
See,
wow.
The deal with MIA is not only is it a pun on missing in action like MIA, but he also has a fake eye. because he only has one eye.
He is literally missing his eye.
He is literally MIA.
And the thing is that I knew that, and I read it, and I'm like, MIA? How am I even going to say?
I'm blaming the
MIA.
capitalization on this one.
No, that's it's totally on me. I'm
really
super
like that
sick,
pickup.
by the way.
I'm,
So.
I'm blaming the sound issues then. You just couldn't hear what you were saying.
There's our sound issue. Yeah, you guys didn't hear that, right? Ignore that.
I'm super excited about MIA joining Cloud9, actually. I really liked MIA when he was playing on his previous team, and while Elimination is solid, I think there's a very short list of people that could probably fill in and do as good or better of a job, and MIA is on it.
I'd really like to see the role of the substitute player, though, really step up. I mean, not very often with the secure teams, the teams who are operating extremely well, do you actually see a substitute that comes in and really does a ton of work. Now, there's obviously plenty of exceptions with the craziness of the a lot of the roster changes that have been coming up recently, but with some of these larger teams, you just don't see it. The only thing I can think of right now is obviously Sheep and Reginald, but it's so hard for me to say Reginald as a substitute just because I want to see new people who were not previously in the scene come in and actually start to move in and make big plays.
So if you could magic wand it, what role would you have them play?
I'm sorry?
So you said you want to have these backup players have more of a dynamic role in the team. What would that role be?
Well, I want to see one of those really great players from one of the larger teams temporarily go out, and that's in my mind, the substitute is a temporary fix to a roster. It's not a replacement or, somebody who steps in because somebody retired, in big air quotes. I want to see a temporary player come in, cover for a few weeks, and then step back out while still being a functioning part of the team, and actually see that as almost a tactic. I'd love it for it to be the kind of thing where you bring in somebody else from your roster because they match up particularly well against another player. I think that would add a very exciting element to the game that we just don't see yet.
That'd be really interesting if they could do that at the game level.
Can they? That's my... I don't actually know.
I don't think they can at the moment, or at least it's certainly not done.
The thing is, this used to be prominent in Korea. CJ Frost, Frost used to have a 7-man rotating roster. And then they picked up 3 mid laners, and that kind of stopped. And they had their rotation of trying to find their permanent mid laner. And they had an option to switch out different players against teams when you would think that they would be useful in those situations. Teams have that option, and we saw that when Evil Geniuses was in the EU LCS in the summer split of last season. They brought in Shacker to be a more aggressive jungler, and Snoopé was their passive and wasn't really meshing with the meta at the time kind of jungler. And during week 6 at Tenerife, whatever it is, when they were live at that actual tournament, they alternated. They had Shacker play the first game, Snoopé play the next game against MIM, and then brought Shacker back in to close out the week. So the teams have the ability to use these players as long as they're given, I believe it's within like 24 to 48 hours advance notice. Mm-hmm. The only problem is if you're bringing in a player for a specific situation, the other team probably knows that player and what they're going to be doing as well.
But, I mean, following that logic, you can really say that, they can focus on 5. I think 6 adds in that extra dynamic, and if it had to be a public notice, I mean, that 48 hours rule does, I guess, peeve me a little bit. I'd love it to be, maybe same-day decision where you're now having to kind of account for it all the way going up. We'll also probably see a lot less, people puking while they're getting ready to play, like we saw last week.
I think if they're on the roster, I think you're right, Mott, that they should probably be able to swap same day, no warning, make the other team prepare for that possibility, so they have to prep against both players in whatever position is likely to get subbed out. I agree. I think that'd be a very dynamic and very exciting, and it'd be a good option for teams, like you said, like Optimus Tom said, how Snoopé is a bit more of a passive jungler. He specializes in a certain flavor of champion, And if that's not current right now, or it's just not right for the team comp they want to run, they can swap it out for a player who's going to be more dynamic in that role. And that's better for the fans, I think, and adds a little more depth and strategy to the teams, which can't hurt the sport.
Definitely. The only problem I could see being sort of an issue is right now the team pay structure with by what's provided by Riot is kind of set around the 5-member roster. I think if you have teams who have a lot of extra money because they have sponsors with deep pockets, you have that ability. But maybe some of these more up-and-coming teams would have, more of a difficult time getting there. But, Tom, do you actually know, what is the breakdown of income, roughly estimates here, of what a team receives from sponsorship money versus what teams receive as full-on, Riot money?
Sad to say that number is impossible to generate, mainly because right now you'll have a team like a Velocity that came in, or I guess there's no real equivalent of Velocity in the NALCS right now. I guess maybe it would be like a Rock Hat or a Super Hot Crew in EU LCS. But you have a team that comes in, like Super Hot Crew is actually a really good example because they are their own name brand. So they came in as the players. They decided to make a team and a name brand based around that fact. And they had what Riot provided them against a TSM or a Curse or an EG, where, well, they rain money down from sponsors as well as websites and guide sites and stream revenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. While the numbers aren't as definite, I would have to say that the actual Riot portion for a Super Hot Crew is a large amount, whereas for a more established name in esports like a TSM or something, it's probably a very minimal amount in that case.
Tying into our last discussion, it's going to be interesting to see over time how the role of sort of support isn't the right word in this context, but the amount of staff that comes along with these teams, life coaches, analysts, how that's really going to affect these smaller teams' performance when they don't have access to that kind of information. In a weird way, I'd love to see a crowdsourced team where Team Reddit comes up or something like that, and each week they're like, "Hey, what did we do wrong?" And
Reddit plays
LCS. Yeah,
it plays LCS. That'd be great.
It happened back at the Lone Star Clash 2 when former Orbit, now known as Cloud9, was dropped by Quantic because Quantic disappeared. Their manager and everything just disbanded, and the owner, up and left. And they couldn't afford to go to the tournament, so they became Team Reddit Nation for a tournament and took third place. So
there you go.
It's happened before.
There you go. Well, speaking of poor management practices, let's hop right into some of the news. Very unfortunate news out of Korea. We had a pro gamer who attempted suicide after discovering that there was match fixing involved. So Korean player Promise, I'm not going to get into the details of the exact action, but unfortunately attempted to commit suicide after finding out that his team manager was essentially rigging the games, forcing the team to win and lose as a whole, if I'm not mistaken. It was a whole series of bets that were going on for the involved games. This is obviously the most horrendous thing that could happen in this kind of scene. And, I mean, Tom, I think you're a little bit more familiar with the way that the scene works on that side than I am. What kind of format do they play with there where the management is allowed to get away with it like this?
Well, first off, they're not, because sports betting through non-officiated services is illegal in South Korea. So this guy was pretty much running a kind of, I'm not going to say like a crime syndicate because it wasn't huge, but this guy was running an illegal operation with funds basically that he had gotten from the website, as well as sponsorship gear that he acquired from AHQ Taiwan, who was in no way actually affiliated with this manager or the team. he just kind of got gear for them to fund these players that he was going to assume as a coach.
And a key point of the story is he kept the players believing that they were still sponsored by AHQ. He concealed a lot of this information from them, although they were aware there was something going on. They had reason to believe that it went a lot higher than just this one guy.
And the sad part about it is, not only is this something that I wouldn't say it's common, but something it's happened before in the StarCraft Brood War days. Anybody remembers Savior from StarCraft Brood War? There were huge match fixing scandals back in, I believe it was from 2007 till 2009, where he was involved with that, and he wound up getting a lifetime ban from competitive esports in Korea. So he's donezo, which is really sad because he was really freaking good. But it's also the fact that since these players are so young and they're so determined and focused on playing at the OGN, the competitive level in Korea, that Promise, when he was training with the team for over a year, believed that the only way to secure his future was to go along with what the coach was saying. And one of the only players, Hoon, from the team, realized that something was going wrong because he had been the only other player that was involved in a pro team. So that's preying upon these players whose dream and goal is to compete in OGN, and saying that if you don't lose to Frost, OGN will kick you out. Like some people look at that and they're like, that doesn't make sense with these players. They're like, well, if we get kicked out, we're done. What do we do? It's terrible.
And it's not like this is just some job where you wake up at your apartment, you drive into work, you go off. You can go off and do something else. I mean, for a lot of these people, this is you wake up, you play League, you go to sleep, you're dreaming about League. You live in the house with your team. This is very much your life. And when you build up everything around this and you commit yourself so hard, to find out that somebody is taking heavy advantage of you and what you're actually doing is not even really in your control, that's obvious. A huge mind fuck, really. It's really the only way you can put it, and these tragedies happen. And I think this, in a different way, this trails into, what it takes to be even an LCS player. You really do have to commit so much of yourself to get on the same level as everybody else who's in the LCS. And that's a huge commitment for these people. And it's something you can lose very easily. And if you get dropped out, what do you do? What do you fall back on? It's why these games are so stressful. It's why you see people playing on stage while they're puking, which has happened multiple times to multiple teams. It's a crazy commitment, and it's why I think we make it's such an interesting game, why we have podcasts about it, and why there's all this discussion and focus on it. And I mean, I very much see this as growing pains of the sport. Riot has a responsibility to make this a sustainable career for these people if they want them to operate on this level. And the sponsors who give these kids, I mean, some of these people are older than me, so I say kids loosely, but they have a responsibility of keeping these people in a safe check, and not, overwhelming somebody who's really just learning how to be an adult and how to be, self-sustaining. But let's go on to something a little bit lighter.
Let's talk about video games.
So we'll get into Super Week as we start to look at the upcoming games. But we were recently given notice that the 2014 All-Star event will be in Paris this year, which is really exciting. It's going to feature the top teams of both the NA and EU LCS, LPL, GPL, and OGN championships. The tournament's going to feature a best of 3 games and best of 5 games. And there will be an all-star challenge, fan-elected players from mixed regions and rosters. What's really disappointing to me, in a new format. They haven't announced the format yet. It's going to be fan favorites, I assume fan-chosen, a mix-up of different game types, Twisted Tree Line, Crystal Scar, maybe ARAMs in there. And basically, those players will be featured there, as opposed to sort of an all-star team playing in a tournament style, which is a little disappointing to me. So any thoughts on this? Who we might be seeing from the fan-elected player set out of NAEU?
At least half of TSM would be my guess.
I don't think so, actually. If Bjergsen doesn't come back anytime soon and Reginald stays in, do we have an update on Bjergsen, by the way?
Yeah,
he's
got his visa in hand as of like yesterday.
Okay, great. So he will be back for upcoming week 9.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I think Wild Turtle X Special, almost certainly, unless Double Lift somehow it edges Turtle out. But
And how about on EU?
oof. I think EU is a little tougher because a lot of those teams are, I mean, if you just look at the team level, a lot of those teams are jockeying back and forth, and to then go one step further and pick the best players out of those teams, I think it's going to be much tighter. But I have to say that after at least this week in IEM, Genja would probably be a pretty strong contender. His Varus over the past couple days has just been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Europe always has that kind of mix of like popular players and popular old esports franchises, and then teams that are so close in the standings that everybody's kind of considered pretty darn good. But I think the safe bet is pretty much you could pick a name from Gambit Gaming's roster and they'll probably get voted in. That's what happened last time too. There were 4 Gambit members and they had to kick one out. And then
See,
well, then there's always Reckless. Reckless made a huge splash.
there is Reckless as well, but it's just it's so hard because originally I thought like, okay, Gambit Gaming has a big fan base. Listening to the crowd at IEM this weekend, where it's like, okay, like everybody, like you would think like, okay, they have a big following in like parts of Russia because they're a Russian team, the NA players like look at them, maybe some Korean fans because Diamond Procs in the jungle, everybody knows these big names. And then you hear like the crowd in Katowice just screaming for Gambit louder than anybody else, and you're just like, oh, they got a lot of fans.
Have you heard some Fnatic chants as well, though?
I don't know. I can't really get excited about this until I know the formats. I get much more excited when I think like, okay, who's the best ADC in North America? Who's the best ADC in EU? And how are they going to be able to play with the support? But if theoretically, I mean, not knowing the formats, if we could see mixed roles being added into the same, is it? I guess what I'm getting to is it going to be like the top 5 players, let's say, from each region, or is it going to be or top 2 from each region? Oh, see, that's even worse.
So you could have 2 mid laners, you could have 2 AD carries, you could have 2 supports.
I don't know. I'll have to see how it is, but I'm not a fan of that particular style.
I like it because it's a little different. I mean, why not experiment with it once, maybe?
Because it's a whole year before it happens again. That's why.
Unless they put another one before or after Worlds. They could always do that.
Very true. And what is the prize this year? I didn't actually see that anywhere in the news. Maybe I just didn't dig enough. But have they announced what the prize for winning the All-Star will be?
I don't believe they've announced a prize for it yet, but there's no doubt going to be something pretty huge, especially because the part I like the most about All-Stars now, instead of like the mixed teams were cool, but it led to sloppy games from like an All-Star point of view.
Sure.
Like, I mean, never really has an All-Star game been about big competition. Like when you watch the Pro Bowl, like these athletes are kind of on their vacation and they're having fun and the games are a little goofy. The one thing I really like about All-Stars now is instead of being like a showcase of individual player talent, you have the top team from each region competing in a tournament. So while IEM this past weekend was extremely hyped up, they had like 500,000 concurrent viewers and it was really awesome. There was only one team that was number 1 in their region there, and that was Gambit, or TPA too. So there were 2 top teams from their regions in there. And then everybody else was like 2nd, 4th, 6th place. Now you have number 1 in each region. Everybody always says, we want more international tournaments. Where's the IPL 5? It's right here.
Well, let's hop right into it, actually. So moving on to IEM, it just wrapped up. we saw teams from all over the place. We had China's World Elite, Europe's Gambit Gaming, China's Invictus Gaming, Europe's Millennium, Southeast Asia's TPA, that's Taipei Assassins, North America's Cloud9, Korea's KT Rolster Bullets, and Europe's Fnatic battling it out. A ton of money on the line for these teams. Man, with it so fresh, sorry, chat room, if you didn't get the opportunity to check it out, but we're going to spoiler the shit out of this. KT takes first place, winning $60,000, which is crazy to me. I look at that and I'm like, that's my salary right there. They just won it in a weekend. Followed by Fnatic, Cloud9, Gambit Gaming, Invictus Gaming, Taipei Assassins, very comfortably sitting Millennium right where they are, and Team World Elite, which blew me away. I didn't expect them to end up at the bottom.
Overhyped.
Right.
Most overhyped team there.
So,
yeah, I watched the games with WE, and I just was like, I was a bit taken aback at just how poorly they were doing. Like completely outclassed. They looked like a challenger team against an actual full-time team.
It was part and due that World Elite lost a lot of their players, right? Like some of their players retired, some of their players were transferred. I use air quotes for people that can't see that on the actual podcast taping, but transferred to Edward Gaming, and they haven't meshed together. They're not doing so well in their opening week of LPL. But, you know, they were hyped up like, oh, you know, they still have Wei Zhao, they still have Tao Mei, they still have this World Elite aura about them. They just had a bad start. And then they go into IEM and they proceed to get dumpstered, much like I thought was going to happen to them. And people are like, what happened? Or some people are like, haha, I told you so. They're not that good. And, you know, on the LOL Esports power rankings, they're like number 18, like above Fnatic and Roccat and half the million Korean challenger teams that are probably better than them. And it's just, there was so much hype behind them and they just literally fell flat on their face. It was funny from my perspective.
I don't know, funny. I felt a little bad. Their mid laner and their jungler were just not on the same page. It was like watching Chinese XDG. I mean, it really was pretty bad. Russo and Zukim just could not. I mean, there were some times where they were actually ganking together, but they were mistiming their abilities. They weren't chaining CC. Sometimes ganks came late or too early. They're just completely I don't know whether it was lack of communication or what's going on there, but they were not on the same page, and it really held them back, especially when you compared to Cloud9, who had the complete opposite of that problem and had no problem getting high going.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like, and I might get a little bit bashed for this one, but watching one of the best AD carries in the world, Wei Zhao, who went toe-to-toe with Reckless back at IPL 5, and it was a ridiculously exciting bottom lane matchup towards the end of Season 2, the beginning of Season 3, even throughout Season 3. I feel like with the introduction of Jinx, the introduction of Lucian, the changes to the AD carry role, while I'm still on the boat that AD carries are called AD carries for a reason, Wei Zhao does not look like he's adapted very well to the playstyle of a Lucian, to the playstyles that are more popular right now. His Lucian, his positioning still seemed great. His item paths were pretty much similar to what other Lucians were doing. He was getting out-farmed, which doesn't normally happen to him. He was just getting out-laned by his opponents, and I don't know. Personally, I just feel like Wei Zhao, he hasn't adapted quite yet. And whether that's chalked up to a lack of synergy in the team or a lack of practice or just him not adapting to these newer AD carries, I don't know. But that was the biggest disappointment for me, was watching Wei Zhao.
Well, I don't watch Wei Zhao regularly, but I did notice in the bottom lane during World Elite's games, at least with Cloud9 and Gambit, that a huge factor was Morgana being played.
That too.
And how much of it is just Morgana being strong with new item changes and the Chinese teams not adapting, and the support sort of giving both Genja and Reckless a bit of a leg up, making that lane a little easier, helping them get their farm going, helping them take an early lead, establishing those ganks with the Morgana bind. You know, and a carry can't do everything on their own. The supports have to enable a lot of that. And Morgana is an extremely good support at setting up that kind of stuff, especially with the new change to Spell Thief's Edge.
Yeah, the Morgana seemed to hinder all of the Asian teams like the entire weekend. And if you in that bottom lane for the first couple levels, like you said, the support really dictates the flow of things. And if you're playing one of those catch supports, if you're playing the Leona, you're playing the Thresh, the standard kind of things that not only require the support to make something happen and be the initiator, but require that level of kind of bottom lane synergy. You have a Sneaky and Elimination who've been playing together for a decent amount of time since the beginning of Summer Split Season 3, maybe a little bit before that. And you have a Edward and Genja who, while they took a mini vacation during the Summer Split of Season 3, have been playing together since the end of Season 1. Now you throw it up against World Elite, who's had these roster shifts, there's a new meta game, a new season, and a new champion that they haven't really tried out against yet, being the Morgana. It really starts to show. So I guess while a lot of the blame can't be just solely placed on Wei Zhao, it is just the fact that the team, without a doubt, they all underperformed.
Sure.
All right. So going through each match, we saw KT Pulse just obliterate everybody. They didn't lose a single game, even in the semifinals, just walking straight over Gambit and Fnatic. But
well, technically they walked behind Gambit to win that one, but
if you haven't caught that game, definitely go. It is one of the best backdoors I've ever seen. Certainly the most populous backdoor. The backdoor with like 4 people.
Can you even really call it a backdoor if 4 people walk into the base? That's pretty much just like someone left like the sliding glass door to the porch open and they just completely knocked it down and they're just like, all right, it's party time.
We're like a SWAT team breaching through the windows. They're rappelling down off the roof.
I feel like almost though you don't expect something like that because you expect them to try to meet you and not just go for the most obvious entrance into the back. I feel like that's pretty easy and a pretty next level strategy just to send everybody backdoor.
And there's also a lot of guts. I mean, they put a lot of faith in the one player that they left behind to defend to just capture so much of the attention that they wouldn't notice this huge blob on the mini-map coming down into the base. And sure enough, they didn't. Even after they started a recall, I think at least 2 or 3 of those recalls were interrupted by the top laner that stayed behind?
Like, let alone the fact that it was like almost a 50-minute game at that point, and the person they left back was the Renekton, who was way past his prime in that game, if I recall correctly. So you have a top laner stopping 5 recalls, and the game at that point was ridiculous. I mean, we said we were going to spoil some things, so I'm just pretty much going to devolve into it right now. Like, that game was all about KTB for the first 20 minutes. And then there was the Gambit Miracle fight, the 20-something minute fight around a dragon pit where Gambit just completely takes over. And the problem being is KTB, Insec had been rolling with Jungle Kha'Zix for a predominant part of the weekend. And he was building it very similarly to the way that Diamond Prox built his Evelynn, whatever way he feels fits the situation for that game. So having this Kha'Zix pickup, it was talked about by the casters, the teams were acknowledging it, very powerful jungle pickup. Gambit takes it away, and Gambit has Alex Ich. So they give Alex Ich Kha'Zix in this game, and after like the 20-something minute mark, he starts getting resets, he starts going off in that game. And at some point, I believe it was like a 13-3 Kassadin against a 12-4 Kha'Zix. There was a Baron fight that Gambit won. Gambit took the Baron down. They went for that top lane push, and they forgot to ward their bottom jungle. And all of a sudden, Peke the Kassadin, in this circumstance, it was Ryu, brought a bunch of friends, and they partied in Gambit's face, and they were gone. But that game, for the 20-minute to 45-minute mark, was so incredibly close. And Gambit was winning. They were in the lead with gold. They had the kills. And they just forgot one thing, which was keeping
It
vision.
was so abrupt, too, because the momentum, the whole game was close. And then that turnaround from Gambit so quickly, and they were going forward the base with such conviction. Like, as the viewer, you're like, oh my god, I'm going to see this incredible comeback victory.
Game 3!
Nope. And I really feel bad for Darian, because that Gambit fight you were talking about, as flashy as Alex Ich was picking up those resets, Darian Shyvana was laying down so much AoE in that fight. He had almost the entire team low, so that enabled Alex Ich to get the resets almost immediately after jumping on his next target. I think he was a really unsung hero in that fight. His flame breath was just, he basically, the way he positioned himself walking around the whole team, he was essentially catching everyone in that AoE magic burn. And, he was also zoning. I mean, felt like he was everywhere.
They had the quintessential setup for a Kha'Zix team. If I recall correctly, Diamond was playing Evelynn that game. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but they had the big tank to go in. They have the AoE team fight presence around that tank. They have the AD carry in the back that's going to be laying down a ton of damage because it's Genja. Whatever build he goes, he knows the situation he's going to be stuck in. And then you have Kha'Zix. You jump into the fray, you get one target low. The AoE around you is making sure that everyone else is literally burning to a crisp. So when Alex jumps in and gets that one target, all of a sudden the team fight is done from one kill. And you have an AD carry, you have a Kassadin, you have a support that are all giant targets for that Gambit composition. And it worked extremely well. The one thing that it lacked a little bit was once you commit to a fight, a majority of your initiation and mobility is gone. And always saw what happens when your mobility is not there to try to get back to the base.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to the other side of the semifinals, the games between C9 and Fnatic. It seems out of everything in this tournament, this happened to be the most closely matched in terms of numbers, at least, with a one game in the favor of C9 and two in the Fnatic. I'm the worst podcast host ever, and I didn't actually get to watch either of those games.
You should go. They were some of the best of the entire weekend.
Yeah. So break down those games. What did we see out of Cloud9 and out of Fnatic that may trickle down into these upcoming weeks for the LCS? A lot of people are pointing out and saying that Cloud9 and Fnatic are creating quite the rivalry. And that will be exciting to see if Fnatic in the next couple of weeks here can really step it up and move their way up to the top of the roster and TSM makes some mistakes. I'd love to see these two teams in the All-Stars, seeing how their international play was displayed here this week. Thoughts?
Well, Cloud9 really impressed me in this particular match, even though they did wind up losing at the end of it. What struck me was that they are really good at counterpunching. Every time Fnatic would take some kind of advantage, they would win a team fight or they'd get a successful rotation for a tower. Cloud9 was always punching back. They never let them get anything for free. If they took a tower, they would rotate for a buff. If they won a team fight and went to go take Dragon, Cloud9 would push a tower somewhere else. And it was so quick. And just no hesitation at all. And it allowed Cloud9 to stay in games a lot longer than they really should have. I think what it ultimately came down to in the first game was a questionable 4v5 that Cloud9 didn't have to be in. They just decided, let's go take this dragon. They probably should have just let it go. They didn't, and it sort of went pretty bad. Game 2, the highlight for me, probably most people's highlight, is Hai's barrel combo. During their final push, he threw out a Gragas barrel, which was then dodged by Reckless, and then he explosive cast Reckless back into the AoE of the barrel and activated it while he was still flying through midair and killed him. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
And,
what about you, Tom?
So the biggest thing, more than like a specific instance or a specific game, was I really liked the competence level of both of these teams going into this best of three. And the way that pretty much it was kind of on day one, Cloud9 kind of came in and we were like, they had that confidence. They wanted to, they played their game. And it worked against TPA, it worked against World Elite, and they got into the finals or the bracket rounds pretty easily. Fnatic didn't, and Fnatic hasn't been playing that way in LCS for a while. So when they got to this rivalry matchup, it was kind of like they just threw everything against the wall. And while I kind of feel like the team that was on blue side dictated a little bit more of how picks and bans went in this series overall, they weren't really afraid to kind of throw everything out there. Like, there may have been some questionable calls, like the 4v5 fight at Dragon by Cloud9 in the first game, but what really stuck out to me was Cloud9 wasn't afraid to put Meteos on Lee Sin and let him do his Lee Sin thing that he's been doing in the LCS. they weren't afraid to pick the composition that they thought they were going to. For Pete's sake, Cloud9 was bringing out Morgana against TPA and World Elite, which is something they hadn't seen before, and something that Europe and NA, or Europe started and NA's been experimenting with since then, and they just kind of just went for it against these teams that they didn't necessarily have as much information against. Fnatic, on the other hand, came off like they won an 8-game losing streak. They won a game or two, and then they lost 2 more games. They lose the first game of the first day. They're not looking so great, and they make it into the bracket round. And then against Cloud9, they play like Fnatic again. Like, they're going for big plays. They're not doing the Fnatic death brush, but you're having the let's kite Meteos and Lemonation around the jungle, and all of a sudden Xpeke and Cyanide show up, and all of a sudden it's a big fight they weren't ready for. We win this, take a bunch of towers, and then kind of retreat into our Fnatic lair until the next thing happens. Like, the teams weren't afraid to play to the styles that we knew they played in Season 3, and that's, to me, the biggest thing that made it like these series to watch. Like, the finals were great. The rest of the series, the tournament games were fantastic. But that one stands out because it was literally quintessential Cloud9, quintessential Fnatic. Let's throw down.
Especially games 2 and 3, which were essentially mirror opposites of one another. And game 2, Cloud9, like you said, they were playing very decisive. They had a hard engage against Fnatic's. Really, I thought it was a well-designed siege comp, but it just wasn't. They weren't executing it right. Xpeke was missing a lot of Nidalee spears. And when Cloud9 decided to go, you could see them changing gears. They blew all the initiations perfectly in a coordinated fashion. And when they decided to make the call, they hesitated. And they did not hesitate. And they didn't stop at anything until they were on top of Fnatic. And once they got there, it was over. Flip it around to the other side, you had Fnatic really highlighting their ability to be explosive in game 3 when they were coordinating between Ziggs throwing his ult and the bottom lane. They were using ults to zone and set up catches with Thresh. And once they got Reckless going, he was just snowballing really hard down in that bottom lane. And they were rotating really rapidly, controlling the minion waves. So like you said, once they won something or caught somebody out, they could immediately turn that into several objectives in quick succession, which I think really plays to their style, and they're the masters at it. Like, sometimes even when you're watching, you're not keeping track of the minion waves. They'll win a team fight or something, and then all of a sudden 1 tower down, 2 tower down, they steal a buff, then they go back by, and all of a sudden they're back up in front again. It's a really breakneck style that they have to spend some time setting up, whereas Cloud9, it feels like they're ready to go at a moment's notice, but perhaps not quite as explosive.
It's like Fnatic has this rapid style, almost like, for lack of a better word, I guess I'll use blitzkrieg. Like, they kind of just storm in, take the things when they want, and then fall back. Whereas Cloud9 seems to already have the mental preparation of, in this circumstance, this is what we will do to make this situation happen. And they execute that. So when you have a team that can try to literally throw a wrench in those plans against a team who might be expecting that wrench and might have something to like kind of work around it with and find another like pathway, it was really exciting. And as with most of the games in 2014 season so far, it was really dictated by Dragon Control. Yep. And giving the Fnatic Ziggs in game number 3 was a big factor to that, because as you said, using the Ziggs ultimates to zone out and set up minion waves, Xpeke, I want to say, used 5 or 6 Ziggs ultimates on bottom lane, like before the 20-minute mark was even reached, and then using the giant AoE that they had set up to work out those Dragon Pit fights, to get everybody low to force Cloud9 back and force them into a rapid retreat pick-off situation, completely Fnatic style. And while I'm talking a lot about Fnatic because, like, the European teams are kind of my jam right now, like,
and they won, so.
Yeah, huge props to Cloud9, though. Like, both of these teams kind of, I guess, transitioning a little bit more into like the next point, since the series is exciting, so we've been talking about it obviously for a little while at this point, but both of these teams being able to take that momentum from that series, if they put that into their respective LCS regions, it's going to be a blast to watch week 9.
Well, that becomes really the major question, because essentially both of these teams, and Fnatic more than Cloud9, just experienced another super week while all other teams got a break. I mean, going into Cloud9, going into week 9.
Oh, Meteos.
Hashtag swoon. How do you think this is going to be a factor? Just overall exhaustion. I mean, porting a lot of this into just a couple of days after coming off a super week. How do you feel like this is going to affect the games coming up in week 9?
Well, I don't have any professional game experience, so I can't speak as to how the wear and tear is going to be on these guys. Mm-hmm. But from the performance, I don't think either Cloud9 or Fnatic really have the performance they put on was world class. If anything, they're going to get a morale boost, I think, out of the performance they had at IEM, and they're going to go into week 9 with momentum. I think especially Cloud9 is going to see a desire to overtake TSM permanently. Sure. They clearly have the drive to do it. Whether or not they're capable is going to be between them and TSM, but they want to be champions. I think they showed that more than anything else, because even in Game 3, when they were getting stomped on, they were still in that fight, a very attrition-based style. Like Optimus Tom said, they've got lots of if-thens in their head. If this happens, we'll do this. They always have a best move for whatever worst-case scenario they find themselves in. And that, combined with how well they're working together, I mean, they're going to be able to come back a lot. Mm-hmm. They're going to be able to establish early leads and ride them down. I'm going to feel pretty good about their chances coming up. I love TSM, but Cloud9 obviously has a mission in mind, and I don't think they're going to stop.
Seems to be a lot of TSM love on this particular podcast. Just saying.
Well, I'm going to be keeping my eye on Fnatic in this upcoming week. I mean, Cloud9 goes up against Coast. Coast has something to prove. If their performance continues after losing all 4 games in Super Week, they're very realistically looking to get pushed into relegations by the end. I haven't done the forecast on their schedule quite yet, but I do know that for XGG and Gambit, the 2 teams who are, as of today, facing relegations, if the performance keeps up, Coast will be a determining factor in what those 2 teams end up with. But Fnatic's going up against Roccat, and they're going up against Copenhagen Wolves. Winning both of those games can put them into the number 1 spot, or at least in some contention for the number 1 or the number 2 spot.
Well, let's be honest with Europe right now. Millennium wins 4 games, and they're in contention for the number 1 spot at this point.
True. But, I mean, no other European team at the moment, other than maybe Gambit having a little bit of fatigue in there. Not a ton, not as much as Fnatic will have. But after a crushing loss in the finals, they're going to have to bounce back hard. Double Super Week, essentially, plus a major crushing defeat. I mean, sitting at 10-10 when the difference is 2 games is going to be big. And every team in Europe is hungry right now. They're hungry for that number 1 spot. So it's going to get crazy there. I mean, NA, great. Cloud9 goes up against Coast. Really, what Cloud9 is fighting for right now is that first position in the All-Star game, and not knowing what the benefits of going to that All-Star game is right now, I question motivation. Why should they have to really play their hearts out when they'd have to lose every single game to go into relegations? And, what are they really playing? What do they have to play for unless they know what they can get at the All-Star games?
Well, at this point, technically, they're playing for a spot in the spring playoffs. And then in the spring playoffs, they would be playing for the spot at the All-Star game. Right. So they still have a little bit of time before that, but getting first place to go into the spring playoff bracket means that they are looking at playing a team that is most likely significantly weaker. Because at this point right now, looking at the NA standings, within reason, Cloud9's 2 biggest enemies are obviously TSM in first place, and CLG in third place. And I believe that Cloud9 coming up relatively soon, they still have a game or two against CLG to test their mettle.
Mm-hmm.
So going into the spring playoffs, first place and second place, if they're keeping the same format and I recall correctly, they get a bye in the playoffs, meaning that they will have to play off against the third place, which would at this point in time be CLG, or sixth place team, which at this point in time is Coast, one of those two. I believe it's Coast at this point.
Hold on.
And either way, very preferable.
It's actually Dignitas.
Oh, Dignitas.
Yeah, Dignitas.
Completely forgot that Dignitas lost a bunch of games for no reason.
Actually, Dignitas, I feel like there was a game that was suspended or rescheduled because Dignitas has not played as much games. Dignitas is 8-11 and Curse is 8-12. I think there was a game that was missed in there and needs to be made up.
The website may not have updated that properly.
Well, I'm wrong. I'm bad.
So at this point,
At
this exact point, everybody's played 20 games, which means there's only 8 left. So, I mean, going back to the original point with Cloud9, what's the motivation to get first place? The motivation to get first place is to keep being Cloud9. Because at this point, Cloud9 was the number 1 team. They lost 3 games last split. This split, they've lost more than 3 games by a decent amount. They went through the playoffs completely unscathed and crushed TSM 3-0.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about it, TSM is always TSM, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to have their fans pretty much no matter what. Their players are individually very popular. They're consistently doing well. They've got a really hot mid laner, a really hot bot lane pair. Cloud9, they have extremely good mechanical players, but I think their identity as Cloud9 trumps even the individual identities of their players. And the identity of Cloud9 is a bulletproof monster team. And the more they feed that narrative, I think the stronger they are and the more momentum they can carry into playoffs, all-star game, the next split. I think the whole spring split in general is a little motivation-wise, but I don't know that we want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
See, this is where substitutes would come in great. Just put your subs in; they'll be fine.
Don't risk a wrist injury.
Exactly.
Don't take that chance.
just put St. Vicious back in. He'll play top lane, right?
Yeah, just put St. Vicious on any team. So let's take a look at Week 9, the upcoming week in the EU and NA LCS. We have Gambit Gaming on Alliance, Super Hot Crew on Millennium, Rockhat on Fnatic, Copenhagen Wolves on SK Gaming, Gambit Gaming on Millennium, Rockhat on SK, Alliance on Super Hot Crew, Fnatic on Copenhagen Wolves. It's so tight right now in the EU LCS that a lot of this actually makes a super big difference. With each team playing twice, if I'm not mistaken, that is literally the difference between 4th and 1st place for a lot of these teams right now. Your game to watch for this week, Optimus Tom, I'll default to you since you're my EU man.
So there's 2 ways or 3 ways you could go with this one.
Oh, God.
But if I had to pick one game, it's going to be Rockhat against SK. Mm-hmm. So obviously Rockhat Fnatic is super hype. Copenhagen Wolves, SK Gaming, like two reformed or up-and-coming teams that are at the top of the table. I want to look at SK tied for 1st place against Rockhat, falling into what is now technically 3rd place because of the 1st place tie. Rockhat has not beaten SK Gaming. SK has a very influenced play style. They look at other regions, they see what's working out, they look at their champion pools, they see what can work for them, and they play it. SK is a ridiculously talented team. There's argument that you could say Candy Panda or Sven Skaren are very talented players and they carry the team, but you take one piece out from that SK puzzle and they fall apart. That's the way Rockhat was until like right before Super Week, where they just started losing and they don't look quite the same. Could be Rockhat like running out of steam, very similar to another Polish team. You guys might remember MYM, what they wound up doing, they ran out of steam extremely early on in the season. But Roccat and SK, it's the game to watch for me. It's like the team no one expected to do well that all of a sudden is at the top of the charts against the team that stomped NIP, rose to the top of the charts, and now is kind of losing steam very quickly.
So, per some fan mail request, and thank you guys for sending in all of that lovely fan mail. It has been great. Awesome criticisms on my CLG callouts and EU lack of knowledge. Work in progress. Love the bow ties. We're gonna Optimus Tom and then Greg. I'm gonna have you run through the NA and give your predictions. Give me a prediction on each game, and next week we will follow up and see how well you did. And you know what? I'm gonna mix shit up right now. We're gonna keep score. We're gonna keep score. Right. It's gonna be all the way for the rest of the season. It's gonna be between the two of you. I will keep my own score. And we will see who makes the most correct predictions.
Loser buys the winner a bow tie.
How about this? The winner gets an official TForce LCS bow tie.
Yeah. I love it.
Here we go. Breakdowns. Gamut Gaming versus Alliance. Optimus Tom.
Do we want to talk about it, or do you just want to
fast. Gambit. Super Hot Crew Millennium.
Super Hot Crew Millennium. Super Hot Crew.
Roccat Fnatic.
Overpow. Roccat.
Copenhagen Wolves SK Gaming.
SK.
Gamut Gaming Millennium.
Gambit.
Roccat SK Gaming.
SK Gaming.
Alliance Super Hot Crew.
Alliance.
I don't know what that is. The document's terrible. Fnatic versus Copenhagen Wolves.
You guys can't see it, but there's a couple semicolons. There's an M in there.
My finger was like one space off to the right. Fnatic, Copenhagen Wolves.
Fnatic.
All right. Greg, we're going to go through NALCS. This will be both the recap for the week and the predictions. Team Dignitas versus XTG.
XTG.
He's got to call it his game of the week during this, too.
God damn it. Coast versus Curse.
I'm going to go with Coast.
You chose properly. Evil Geniuses versus Dignitas.
I really want EG to win, but I think Dig will.
TSM CLG.
TSM.
XTG EG.
EG.
That's my game of the week, by the way.
Really?
Coast versus TSM.
TSM.
Cloud9 versus Coast.
Cloud9.
And Dignitas versus CLG.
CLG.
All right, so as we wrap up this week's show,
and my game of the week will be TSM versus CLG.
Okay.
I think both teams have come a long way this season, and especially with CLG's recent momentum, I think it'll be something special.
All right. I am picking XGG versus EG because these are the two bottom teams right now, and they both have a ton of ground to cover to be able to get themselves out of relegation. And this is going to be not only a forecast for the final game of the NALCS proper with those two teams playing, but this will really kind of set the pace for what it's going to take for either of these two teams to move out of that position. So that will be my game to pick for the game to watch. We lost steam at the end there. So
I'm gonna go ahead and say this is the game that decides 7th and 8th place, and the 8th place team starts with a vowel.
All right, we'll see. So thank you everybody for joining us. I am Motganorum, signing off for the TForce LCS rundown, joined by Optimus Tom.
That's me. I got my name below there, so I think it's me.
And Optimus Tom, you were tweeting at what?
I am tweeting at Optimus Tom. It's very convenient. I'm very uncreative in that way.
Yeah, I am also very rarely tweeting at Motganorum. For those of you who do follow me on Twitter, I did admit CLG is pretty good, so if that's not enough reason to follow me on Twitter, well then there you go. And Greg, CredibleMushroom, Russo, thank you for joining us and being a part of the show. You have been a lovely addition thus far.
I had a lot of fun.
And you are tweeting at?
At GRRUSSO.
Aglarusso. Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for listening. For those of you listening out in podcast world, join us again next week, Sunday at 9 p.m. as we talk about Week 9 in the LCS. Bonus material for those of you who will be going to PAX East in Boston in April 10th, 11th, and 12th, if I'm not mistaken. I will be there. Super exciting. And I will be carrying tons of Riot points and both Trinity Force podcast swag and LCS Rundown podcast swag. So come find me, come find the bow tie, come find my gorgeous girlfriend, and we will have plenty of things to give away. But you must use the keyword Optimal Tom to get it. So write that down.
I guess I'm not getting any TForce swag.
Please use the keyword Optimal Tom. Thank you again for joining us this week. That's it. See you later.
Bye.